Welcome back to the realm of Final Fantasy XIV. Last time in the Expert Roulette, we tackled the lost city of Antitower hard. Today we're tackling the other dungeon introduced in this patch that makes up the second half of the Expert Roulette, the Antitower. Now the Antitower is actually unlocked through the main scenario, and bears some relevance to the actual story at hand, though you're not going to be seeing any of that actually running through the dungeon regularly. That queue actually took a little while. Patch just came out though, so a lengthy queue is actually more common than a non-lengthy queue. So the Antitower actually has, as usual, is divided into three major legs. The first leg of which is going to be spent simply getting to the tower. Get to run down a very fancy bridge here as we make our way to our very first pull of the dungeon. A single frog. Oh wait, no it's not! A frog, a leech, and a... I don't know what the crap that thing is. Crustacean of some form, I'm sure. All things considered, this fight doesn't actually do a lot. One of these enemies uses... or has a paralyzing attack, and I think there may be an AoE down on the ground at some point, but for the most part, there's just not a lot to worry about. The leech uses a move called Suction, though I don't actually know what that move does. Probably drains life from its target, would be my guess. But for the most part, it's just three random mook enemies. Not a lot to concern yourself with. That opens us up to the next platform. I think Antitower, at least the first two legs of Antitower, suffer from what I mentioned in the previous video even more, which is the idea of here's a platform with the first pull, opens up a second platform with the next pull, opens up another platform with the next pull, opens up the boss. Like, it's legit just floating platform with your pull, kill everything, move to the next floating platform with your next pull. And as such, I actually feel like Antitower is probably my least favorite of the dungeons. Or of the two dungeons. I'd just like to see a little bit more put into it than that. So the new enemy here is the tamed Hropkin. A little bit bigger, a little bit meaner, but still doesn't really do anything worth noting. And that will open us up to floating platform number 3, with another Progo Ribbon Tamer, and a Tame Leech, and a Crustacean. Only partway through they fight, another Crustacean and another tamed Hropkin both join in the fray. At this point, you're probably going to be getting hit by more than a few guys, so this may be a little bit rough on the tank, but other than that, not too big a deal. I guess I feel like another reason I'm not as fond of this dungeon is even the regular enemies don't do anything of note. You just kinda punch them. But that takes us to the first boss, the Zororago, a very large frog. As with the Lost City Hard, this fight is not a terribly complicated fight. There's two main mechanics you need to keep your eye out on, aside from some AoEs that you'll see drop down. The first mechanic is simple enough to deal with. You'll see a couple water bubbles show up as they have right there. Simply don't stand near them because after a moment they're going to explode into small AoE bubbles. What you see him doing right now is a conal front-facing AoE that can simply be sidestepped even by the tank. If I had to take a wager, it did continuous damage the longer you're standing in it though, so at least if you're in it for a brief amount of time, it's not that big a deal. More water bubbles and a couple ads. Now, when the ads show up this first time, 2 people in the party are going to be turned into frogs. There's literally nothing you can do as a frog, just run around and avoid the AoEs that will be spawning over top of you, and that will leave the other 2 members of the party in order to take out the ads that have shown up. Once the 2 ads are dead, everybody turns back into people again, and you can go on and continue the fight. Occasionally, an ad will show up and you won't be turned into frogs, such as this one here, and who gets turned into frogs, I believe, is random. If it's not random, then it's both DPS, followed by the healer and the tank, followed by both DPS. Turned into a frog once again. This time it is... No, this time it's me and the healer. I think it was me and the healer last time as well, leaving a DPS in the tank or a DPS and the healer, which I suppose is fair. Whoever's not a frog just needs to focus down the existing frog ads, turn everybody into people again, and then go on and take out the boss again. On top of the AoEs that come down throughout the frog phase, there's also just some raid damage being done, so be quick or be healed. And we can then fly off to leg number 2. Leg number 2 is still effectively floating circles with pulls in them. It mixes it up a little bit more than the previous one, in that there are some connected that you can pull things together and some you cannot, and there appear to be some degree of mob priority. There's a couple of mimics on this first platform. You can just yank them down to the second platform. I've always been told that the first priority is taking out the Spriggan Doorkeep. I'm not especially sure why, but I feel like as long as that Doorkeep is alive, the fire homunculuses are going to continue to be spawned. But with that said, there's still not a lot else going on. The Spriggan has a conal AoE that I believe has some knockback to it as well, and the fire homunculi do exactly what you would expect a fire elemental to do. Once the Spriggan's dead, I don't even know if there's a mob priority. I'm killing a mimic because I feel like it. There will be a lot of dudes, so you should be AoEing. Monk doesn't have the best AoE in the world, though it did get considerably better come Heaven's Ward. But be prepared. Next up, you can grab a couple of the existing golems and drag them down to where another Spriggan Doorkeep is. Once again, I focused on the Doorkeep first. You're going to be getting not only the golems, but also the fire elementals showing up, and I believe after you kill enough dudes, more golems spawn. There's a lot of guys attacking here. The golems have a circular AoE, as you can see there, but for the most part, there's not a lot fancy going on here. There's just a lot of dudes. So I imagine the tank is probably going to be getting hit kind of hard. If you don't have the capacity to AoE, such as if you're out of TP, like I would tend to be, or at least running low, focus your damage on the enemy with the highest HP. This ensures that every enemy is taking the most efficient AoE from the other party member. With the final down, the cabinets close, and our door opens up to the second boss of the Antitower, Ziggy. You may recall we've actually fought a Spriggan boss before by the name of Biggie. Guess they just like those names. Ziggy, for the most part, as we've seen before, only has a choice few major mechanics to concern yourself with. You can go all out at the very start, though he does have a conal AoE that the tank will need to worry about, but very shortly into the fight he'll summon 3 Stardust. These need to be destroyed as soon as possible to stop the AoEs on the ground from growing. Once they're done, you can simply go back to beating on Ziggy. You've got a little bit of time here before the AoEs actually go off, but then, after the AoEs do go off, Ziggy will take careful aim and pinpoint one person in the party. This time it was the tank, who doesn't appear to know how to handle this mechanic. You'll see a tether connecting Ziggy and the person to be attacked by his cannon shot, effectively. What you need to do is move so there is a stone between you and Ziggy. This will cause the explosion to hit that stone and blow it up. It will do this twice at first. Every time he does it after this, it will be 3 shots. Also, this round, there are no longer 3 of these Stardust. There's now 4, and an ad shows up. You're familiar with the mechanics, it's time to take on a slightly larger role. But you see as he is dragging it behind the stone, so the stone takes the blow. And then he'll be dragging it over and putting it behind a second one. And then the third one, just to mix it up, Ziggy will fly somewhere else in the arena entirely, so you've got to reposition yourself so you actually get behind another rock. Of note, when he fires out that explosion, do not be standing in its way. It won't explode when it hits you, but it will hurt as it passes through you. With Ziggy done, we can move on now to the third leg of the Antitower, where we're actually within the Antitower. I feel like I would have liked this dungeon a lot more if the second leg were also inside the tower. Because look at this, you're inside an upside-down tower. Chandeliers are hanging from the floor. If you look up, there's carpet on the ceiling. In these larger rooms, there's even chairs and tables on the ceiling. All the monsters that you're going to be fighting in these large rooms are statues on pedestals and things on the floor that fall down, breaking on the ground and spawning the actual monster. Now, if you want a big pull, you'll grab the first couple guys and drag them into the first room here. You'll notice there are some wind-up mages, as well as some wind-up Vikings, and then the large centaurs. My first priority tends to be the wind-up mages, as they cast an AoE around themselves. At least I think it's around themselves. No, it's just a targeted AoE. But it's still a rather annoying targeted AoE. Taking them out means less dancing. I then follow that up by taking out the wind-up Vikings, who have a conal AoE, and finally the centaurs. The Centaurs take a little bit more of a beating to actually go down, though they have a rather large AoE centered around themselves. As always with bigger pulls, the tank is probably going to be getting hit a little bit hard, so do as many AoEs as you can. If you cannot do AoEs, or are simply bad at them, focus down one enemy at a time, as I did. If you feel like the tank is getting especially hard, then focus down either a specific enemy, such as I'm focusing down the wind-up magus, or the enemy with the least HP to reduce the number of enemies so the tank is getting hit less hard. Or if you so choose, you can simply AoE everything down. That's your call. We've seen all the enemies in the second leg. More wind-up magus and wind-up Vikings as we move into the next room. Grab some from the hallway and drag them into the room, where we meet up with a couple more. Once you kill the ones that were actually in this room originally, more will fall from the ceiling. As you defeat them, more will fall from the ceiling. There's our first wind-up Viking. Despite that we have a Viking left over, that Viking probably got pulled from the hall, leaving us with the Magus and Viking that just now fell from the ceiling. I think when you defeat these, some more Centaurs show up. If not more Centaurs, then more of these and Centaurs. There we are, 2 Centaurs and 2 of the wind-up dolls. And with them defeated, we've cleared the way to the boss of the Antitower. A group of adorable, creepy dolls. You may remember Kalka and Brina from, what was it, Final Fantasy VI? 4? 5? I don't know, I'm sure somebody knows more than I do. In this first phase of the fight, I actually focused on the Brinas first. The circular AoEs, the donut AoEs they put around themselves, just tend to restrict movement a lot more so than the Kalkas, who have only a large conal. So with the Brinas down, movement becomes much easier. But that was merely the intro for the fight. As they did in games past, they turn into Kalka-Brina, one very large, very angry doll. A couple mechanics in this fight to worry about. One is that eye that you saw, a terrifying glance, that will appear over somebody's head. Try not to hit more people with that AoE than you need, because it's a very big AoE. It can be dodged, however, simply by looking away from it. Shortly after that, Kalka-Brina will ready Brace, which, much like when you were fighting Ravana, puts up a shield on 3 sides of her, so you can only attack her from her front. It will always be her front that is the open space. And then, shortly after that, she will use Dollhouse, which turns 2 party members, and this time it was both DPS, into a Kalka and Brina doll. The entire time you are dolls, Kalka-Brina will simply pound the ground with slapstick, and will actually continue doing this even after the dolls are dead. She does it for a set amount of time. So get everybody out of them dolls so everybody can be healed. Once that's done, though, you've seen most of the mechanics in the fight. The fight loops at that point as she goes back to using Terrifying Glance. Just before Terrifying Glance, you saw her do a tank buster on the actual tank. I think it was Knockout? But that's for the most part the fight. Brace comes around again, so you're going to want to get in front of her. If you attack any of the sides that have a shield up, if you attack her from the back or sides, in other words, you will actually, I'm not sure if that does damage to her, but the damage will be reflected back to you, and you'll get not only hurt, but knocked back. So this time it was the tank and the healer. I tend to focus on the healer first, so I'll pay attention to where the healer is when the attack is going off, to see which one the healer becomes. Focus down that one first so everybody can get healed. Tanks are sort of unnecessary for that phase. And then once she's done with Slapstick, if she weren't dead anyway, the battle would loop again. 3 real mechanics in that fight, but for the most part they're reasonably easy to deal with. And thus brings us to the end of Antitower. Until next time, everyone.